check out this raised dog bowl holder that I made out of scrap wood from this box of scraps that I ordered from Samara Table Company.
This is my entry for a chance to win $250 in the Samara Table Company second ever Box O Scrap Challenge. And the pressure is on because I already won the first ever challenge with this luxury walnut and epoxy Jenga set. First, I need to make a jig that I can use to cut the circles out for the dog bowls. I make a router cutting jig from a piece of scrap plywood. I use double-sided tape to attach this plywood to my router. Then I attach all of this to the scrap plywood that will become the jig using a single screw. I make one shallow pass with my router to create an outline of a circle. Well, sort of. You can see here the circle isn't perfect, and that's okay. With an outline in place, I can drill a hole big enough to stick a jigsaw blade through, then cut out the majority of the remaining material, being careful not to cut over the router line. Finally, I can use a flush trim pattern bit in my router to finish cutting out the circle in the jig. This bit has a ball bearing on the end that will follow along the clean part of the circle. This cleans up the rough edges that the jigsaw left. And here you can see the first problem. The cutting board scrap isn't big enough to fit both dog bowls side by side. I will need to have them hang over to get everything to fit. With the location of the dog bowls figured out, we can rip this top piece down to width on the table saw. This cutting board scrap is extra thick. I want to thin it out on my planer to give it a lighter look. I also want to give this top a taper, so it will look thicker at one end and thinner on the other. So I make a planer sled using more scrap plywood. The sled will hold the dog bowl top while I run it through the planer. Check out this small piece of wood at the base at one end of the sled. This scrap will elevate the top on one end. More material gets removed from the elevated end as it goes through the planer. This gives the top a tapered look I desired. Just like this, fat on one side and skinny on the other. Now I need to cut the holes for the dog bowls to fit into. I start by removing the majority of the material at my bandsaw. Then, use some double-sided tape to connect the top piece of the dog bowl holder to the jig we made earlier. Then I can use the same template bit I used to make the circle jig to cut the final circles into the top of the dog bowl holder. Now I need to build a base to support the dog bowl top thing. All I have left are a bunch of these scrap cutting board cutoffs. I start by ripping each cutoff piece to the same width on the table saw, then cut each strip into shorter strips on the miter saw. I lay them out in a pattern that I like, mark it with a straight edge and a pencil so I remember how to glue them back together, and that's what I do. I glue them together and add some clamps. I repeat this for the next row of strips, then do it again, and again, and again, and again. You get the picture. I do need to give a shout out to Davis here because his glue up and material thicknesses were absolutely perfect on all of these scraps. And this made things a lot easier for me. And after two bigger pieces were completed, I used more glue and clamps and glued them together to make one big base. Right here you can see the top does not perfectly align with the base, and it needs to so it can be attached later. I used a belt sander to take off small amounts of material until the base fits perfectly flush with the top. And with that done, I use a 1/8 inch roundover bit to soften all the edges on the top before sanding. Now, for some reason, I end up sanding small blocks of wood for hours when I make these Box of Scrap Challenges projects. Apparently, I haven't learned my lesson. I like to use 3M extract paper when I sand. This helps speed the process up. There's a link down below for this along with other items I used on this project if you want to grab some for yourself. I decided to finish this project with some Black Forest Wood Company furniture oil. This stuff is a lot like Rubio Monocoat. Puff on a small amount with a white buffing pad, let it set for a minute or two, then wipe off the excess with a shop rag. And finishing all of these blocks took forever. I guess I just like to learn the hard way. Now we can do the final assembly. I glue the top to the base and hold it in place with some clamps until it dries. Finally, we can see how this thing turns out. Watch the next video on the screen where I take a box of scraps and create a luxury Jenga set. This project won first place in the first ever Box of Scrap Challenge and took home the grand prize of $250. And as always, thanks for watching.